Eliza stood on the weathered steps of the old mansion, her heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The air was thick with the scent of moss and aged wood, the house looming before her like a forgotten monument. It was hers now, left to her by an aunt she barely remembered, a sprawling estate tucked away on the outskirts of a sleepy town. She pushed open the heavy oak door, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The entryway was dim, lit only by the faint afternoon sun filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the dusty floor. "It's just a house," she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to the air like damp fog. As she ventured deeper, exploring the ground floor, her footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. Each space was filled with antique furniture covered in white sheets, like slumbering ghosts waiting for night to fall. She found her way to the kitchen where the remnants of the last meal still lay on the table, frozen in time. "I should have brought someone with me," Eliza said aloud, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Suddenly, a soft whisper sliced through the stillness. "Leave." Eliza spun around, her eyes scanning the room, but seeing no one. "Hello." Her voice wavered slightly, the word hanging in the air unanswered. She strained her ears, wondering if the whisper was just her imagination, spurred by the house's somber atmosphere. With a deep breath, she continued her tour, eventually finding the staircase leading to the upper floors. The wood creaked under her weight as she ascended. At the top of the stairs, she paused, hearing the whisper again, this time more distinct and chilling. "Leave this place." Eliza's heart raced. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. The house remained silent, the only response a soft creaking that seemed to mock her. She explored the upstairs rooms, each revealing more of the house's grandeur and decay. In the last room at the end of the hall, she found a study, walls lined with books and a large desk sitting under a window. Papers were strewn about, and a typewriter sat at the ready, as if waiting for a writer to return. Eliza approached the desk, looking at the yellowed papers. They were letters, written in a hurried scrawl, all addressed to someone named Margaret. She picked one up, reading the looping handwriting, trying to absorb the fear that trembled through the ink. "I fear he will find out. If he does, I do not know what will become of me." The whisper came again, now a desperate, anguished plea. "Help me." Eliza dropped the letter, her gaze darting around the room. The temperature seemed to drop, her breath visible in the air. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "What do you want?" she called into the room. "Find the truth." The voice was now a sorrowful moan that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Eliza's mind raced, her skepticism battling with the fear that gripped her. She couldn't deny what she was experiencing. The house was speaking to her, reaching out from beyond the grave. "I'll try," she whispered back, not fully understanding her promise. She left the study, her mind reeling with thoughts of the letters, the whispers, and the palpable sadness that filled the house. As she walked back down the hallway, she noticed a small door she hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind a flowing curtain. With a newfound resolve, she approached it, her hand hesitating on the knob. "Be careful," the voice whispered, as if right beside her. Eliza nodded, even though there was no one to see her gesture. "I will be," she replied, turning the knob and pushing the door open, stepping into the unknown history of her new, haunted home. As the door closed behind her, the whispers fell silent, watching and waiting. The narrow door opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a steep, dusty staircase leading up to the attic. The air was thick with the scent of age, and each step Eliza took stirred up swirls of dust that danced in the slivers of light piercing through the small attic windows. As she reached the top, the expanse of the attic lay before her, cluttered with trunks, old furniture, and forgotten artifacts covered in cobwebs. The light was dim, the few windows smeared with grime, barely letting in the daylight. Eliza's eyes roamed the space, drawn to a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall, draped with a heavy, dusty cloth. Curiosity piqued. She approached the mirror, her footsteps muffled by the thick dust carpeting the floor. With a gentle pull, she removed the cloth, revealing a beautifully carved frame surrounding a glass that, despite the dust, shimmered slightly as if imbued with its own light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A voice suddenly echoed softly behind her. Eliza spun around, heart leaping into her throat, but there was no one. She laughed nervously, rubbing her arms to dispel the chill. "You really know how to scare someone," she said aloud, hoping her voice would mask her growing fear. Turning back to the mirror, she studied her reflection. The glass was old, giving her image a slightly wavy, ethereal quality. As she watched, her reflection seemed to blur, the background of the attic dissolving into a different scene. A grand room, richly decorated with Victorian furnishings. Startled, Eliza stepped back, her eyes widening. "Wah! What is this?" she stammered, staring as figures began to materialize in the mirror. They were transparent, ghostly, moving about the room as if involved in a silent gathering, oblivious to Eliza's gaze. "Help us!" The whisper returned, more urgent this time. "Who are you? What do you want me to do?" Eliza pressed her palms against the cool glass, her breath fogging the surface. "Free us," the voices murmured together, their plea mingling with the air of the attic. Eliza took a deep breath, focusing on the scene in the mirror. The figures seemed distressed, their ghostly faces turning towards her, eyes pleading. "I don't understand how," she confessed, feeling overwhelmed. "Find the truth about the curse." One apparition, a stern-looking man in a high collar, spoke more clearly than the others. "The curse?" Eliza echoed. The image in the mirror nodded, then faded along with the others, returning the reflection to the normal attic room. Left alone with her racing thoughts, Eliza stepped away from the mirror. She needed to learn more about this curse and these spirits. Determined, she began to sift through the trunks and boxes scattered around the attic, hoping to find any clues about the history of the house and its previous inhabitants. Hours passed as Eliza worked her way through old photographs, letters, and diaries. She discovered a diary belonging to a woman named Margaret, the same Margaret mentioned in the letters she found in the study. Eagerly, she opened it, dust particles swirling in the beam of light that now seemed to focus solely on the book. As she read, Margaret's words painted a vivid picture of life in the mansion during the late 1800s, filled with love, betrayal, and a mysterious curse that had caused much suffering. The diary entries were cryptic about the nature of the curse, but they hinted at a forbidden love and a vengeful act that had unleashed something terrible upon the house and its occupants. "So, the whispers were right," Eliza murmured, piecing together the history. The mirror, she realized, wasn't just showing her scenes from the past. It was showing her the memories of those trapped by the curse. Determined to help, Eliza gathered all the documents, photographs, and the diary. She needed to understand the curse fully to help the spirits find peace. As she prepared to leave the attic, she gave the mirror one last glance. Her reflection nodded back at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a smile flicker across the lips of her ghostly counterparts. "I will find a way to free you," she promised them, her voice firm with resolve. The attic seemed to sigh around her, the air shifting as if in acknowledgement of her vow. With the diary and documents in hand, Eliza descended the stairs, ready to dive into the history of the mansion and unearth the secrets that would free the spirits bound to her new home. Back downstairs, Eliza arranged the old photographs, letters, and Margaret's diary on the large dining room table. The room was filled with a quiet intensity as she pored over the documents by the light of an oil lamp, tracing the history of her family and the haunting curse that seemed woven into the fabric of the mansion. As she absorbed Margaret's words, a clearer picture began to emerge. A story of forbidden love, jealousy, and dark rituals that might have sealed the fate of the mansion's inhabitants. Her eyes grew heavy as she read deep into the night, barely noticing the storm that had begun to rage outside, casting eerie shadows through the windows. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through the silence of the house. Eliza jumped, startled from her concentration. Hesitant but curious, She walked to the front door and opened it to find a man in his 60s, soaked from the rain, holding a wide-brimmed hat in his hands. "Good evening, miss. I hope I'm not intruding. I saw the light on and thought I should make my introductions. I'm Henry Clarkson, the local historian," the man said, his voice gentle. Eliza, although taken aback, invited him in. "I'm Eliza Ward. I just inherited this place from my aunt." Henry's eyes lit up with recognition. "Ah, at the Ward Mansion. You have quite a piece of history here. I've studied this house and its many tales for years." They settled in the living room, where Eliza shared what she had discovered so far. Henry listened intently, nodding occasionally and interjecting with snippets of historical context that helped fill in the gaps in Eliza's understanding. "It seems you've stumbled upon quite the story here," Henry said, peering at the documents. "The curse you're reading about is well known in local lore. It's said to have begun with your ancestor, George Ward, and his dealings with what he believed were powers beyond this world." Eliza leaned forward, intrigued. "Powers beyond this world?" "Yes," Henry continued. "George was heartbroken over a lost love, and in his despair, sought to change his fate through whatever means necessary, delving into rituals that were said to be able to bring back the dead. Is that what the mirror is showing me? These rituals?" "It's possible," Henry mused. "Mirrors are often thought to be portals in many cultures, gateways to another realm, or in your case, perhaps a window to the past, to see the events that have left such a heavy imprint on this place." Eliza shivered, the weight of her responsibility dawning on her. "So, what happened exactly? How did it become a curse?" Henry sighed, a shadow passing over his face. "The ritual was not meant to be. It disturbed the natural order, and instead, it summoned something else, something malevolent. It said that the spirits of those involved were bound to the mansion, unable to move on. As the storm outside intensified, the house creaked and groaned, as if reacting to the story of its past." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. She needed more help, someone who could understand and perhaps communicate with the spirits. "Do you know anyone who could help us? Maybe someone who understands these spiritual matters?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I might," Henry replied thoughtfully. "There's a medium, Mrs. Evelyn Shaw, who might be persuaded to come. She's had dealings with such things before. Could you contact her?" Eliza's voice was hopeful. "I will. First thing in the morning. It's too stormy tonight," Henry assured her. With a plan beginning to form, Eliza felt a slight ease of the burden she carried. They spent the rest of the night discussing the history of the house, each story adding layers to the eerie atmosphere. As Henry prepared to leave, he turned to Eliza with a serious look. "Be careful, Eliza. This house, it's more than just brick and mortar. You felt it. It lives and breathes its past. Listen to it, but be wary of becoming too entwined in its dark history." Eliza nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Thank you, Henry. I'll be careful." With that, Henry stepped out into the night, leaving Eliza alone in the house with her thoughts. She glanced at the documents and then up at the staircase leading to the attic. The mirror up there, now covered again, seemed to beckon her to uncover more secrets, to delve deeper into the shadows of the past that lingered in the corners of the old mansion. The next morning, after a restless night filled with fleeting shadows and the distant echoes of whispers, Eliza awoke to find the storm had passed. The mansion stood quiet, bathed in the soft, eerie calm that follows a tempest. As she descended the stairs, her thoughts were on Henry's promise to contact Mrs. Evelyn Shaw, the medium who might help unravel the tangled threads of the mansion's haunted past. Her phone rang just as she reached the bottom step. It was Henry, his voice brisk and efficient. "Good morning, Eliza. I've spoken with Mrs. Shaw. She's intrigued by your situation and has agreed to come this evening. She believes the energies of the house will be more receptive after sunset." "Thank you, Henry. I appreciate it," Eliza replied, her voice a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. "Just be prepared," Henry cautioned. "Seances can be unpredictable. It's important to remain open but guarded. The spirits may not always be what they seem." Eliza considered his words. "I'll keep that in mind." The day passed slowly as Eliza prepared for the evening. She arranged the sitting room to be as inviting as possible for the seance, placing candles around the room and setting up a small table with chairs in the center. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken anticipation. As the sky began to darken, a knock came at the front door. Eliza opened it to find a small, elderly woman with piercing blue eyes and an air of serene confidence. This was Mrs. Shaw. "Eliza, I presume?" Mrs. Shaw's voice was soft yet clear. "Thank you for having me." "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Shaw." "Please come in," Eliza responded, leading her guest into the house. They settled in the sitting room, where Mrs. Shaw took a moment to sense the atmosphere. "There is a strong presence here," she remarked, her eyes scanning the room slowly. "We should begin soon." Eliza nodded and took her seat at the table opposite Mrs. Shaw. The medium instructed her to join hands, and they closed their eyes, focusing on the energy flowing through the room. "Spirits of this house," Mrs. Shaw began, her voice rising softly but firmly, "we invite you to join us tonight. We seek only understanding and peace." The candles flickered as if in response, and a cold draft swept through the room. Eliza's heart raced, her mind suddenly filled with images of the mirror in the attic. "Show us your story," Mrs. Shaw continued, her voice now a commanding echo in the increasingly chilly room. There was a silence, then a faint rustling sound, like silk brushing against silk. A voice, fragile yet clear, filled the room. "Trapped," it whispered, the single word laden with sorrow. "Who are you?" Mrs. Shaw asked, her tone gentle. "I am Margaret," the voice replied, and Eliza felt a shiver down her spine. "Bound to this place, bound by sorrow." "What binds you? What happened?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling with empathy. "A curse, born of a broken heart and twisted by dark desires," the spirit of Margaret explained. "Free us with truth and forgiveness." Mrs. Shaw's fingers tightened around Eliza's. "We will try, Margaret. Tell us what must be done." But the connection was fading, the air growing warm again, the candles steadying. Margaret's voice became a mere whisper. "Find the heart of the curse in the mirror." As silence fell, Eliza opened her eyes, meeting Mrs. Shaw's gaze, which held a mixture of concern and resolve. "We have much to do," Mrs. Shaw said after a moment. "The mirror in the attic, it's not just reflecting images. It's a gateway, a link to the curse. We must explore this further." Eliza nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes to end this." Mrs. Shaw packed up her things, ready to leave, but paused at the door. "Be careful, Eliza. You are dealing with powerful forces. But remember, they too were once human, and they suffer. Help them find peace, and you will find peace for yourself and this house." Eliza escorted her to the door, the weight of their encounter settling in her heart. "I'll start first thing tomorrow." "Thank you, Mrs. Shaw." As the medium departed into the night, Eliza turned back to the quiet house, the echoes of the past whispering through the walls. Tomorrow, she would return to the attic and face the heart of the curse in the mirror. Whatever it took, she was determined to free the spirits in herself from the shadows that bound them. The morning after the seance, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the impending confrontation between Eliza and the enigmatic forces it harbored. With a steely resolve, Eliza prepared herself to face whatever truths the mirror in the attic might reveal. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing ominously through the quiet house. When she reached the attic, the air felt unusually cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the grimy windows. The mirror stood where she had left it, covered by the cloth she had draped over it the night before. Taking a deep breath, Eliza approached and pulled the cloth away, her heart pounding in her chest. As she gazed into the glass, nothing happened at first. Then, the surface seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a fallen leaf. The room reflected in the mirror began to change, showing the same Victorian room she had seen before. But this time, there was a palpable sense of urgency among the spectral figures. Eliza leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. "Margaret, are you there?" she called softly into the mirror. The figures paused, and the room fell silent. Then, the figure of Margaret appeared, more clearly than before. "Eliza," her voice echoed, faint yet clear. "You must find the locket. It is the key." "The locket? Where is it?" Eliza asked, scanning the room behind her in the mirror. "In this house, hidden. It contains the last piece of my heart, the last piece of the curse," Margaret replied, her image starting to fade. "I'll find it, I promise," Eliza said determinedly. The mirror's surface stilled, returning to a normal reflection. Eliza spent the rest of the day searching the mansion. She combed through every drawer, behind every loose panel, and under each creaky floorboard she could pry up, but the locket remained elusive. As evening approached, her frustration mounted. The house seemed to mock her with its creaks and sighs, each noise a reminder of her lack of progress. That night, as she sat exhausted in the library, the air around her shifted suddenly, becoming charged with a palpable intensity. Books began to rattle on their shelves, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles she had lit. The house was reacting, either to help or to hinder, she couldn't tell. "Enough!" Eliza shouted into the darkness. "I'm trying to help. Why won't you let me?" As if in response, a heavy book thudded to the floor from a high shelf, opening to a page that contained a detailed sketch of the mansion. Intrigued, Eliza picked it up and noticed a small annotation in the margin that mentioned a hidden compartment in the study's fireplace. Armed with a flashlight, Eliza hurried to the study. The room was chilly, the shadows seeming to loom as she approached the fireplace. Kneeling down, she felt along the base, her fingers brushing against a loose brick. Heart racing, she pulled at it, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside, wrapped in a faded velvet cloth, was the locket Margaret had spoken of. It was ornate, gold with delicate engravings that shimmered faintly in the flashlight's beam. Eliza opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there was a miniature painting of a beautiful woman with sad eyes, Margaret, and a lock of golden hair. Suddenly, the room grew warmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as if acknowledging her discovery. Clutching the locket, Eliza whispered, "I found it, Margaret. I found it." Determined to learn more about the locket's significance, she returned to the attic, holding the locket up to the mirror. The surface rippled once more, and Margaret's figure appeared, smiling this time. "You have done well." Margaret's voice was clearer now, almost as if she was in the room with Eliza. "That locket was a token of true love, given to me by George before the darkness consumed him. It is the heart of the curse, the anchor that holds us here." "What do I do with it?" Eliza asked, clutching the locket close. "Release it and release us. Break the locket and the curse with it," Margaret instructed, her voice urgent. Eliza hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Could it really be that simple, after all these years? "Trust me, Eliza. Set us free," Margaret urged. With a deep breath, Eliza nodded, her decision made. "I will. Tomorrow at dawn, when the light is new, I'll do it. I'll set you free." Margaret's image nodded, her smile widening. "Thank you," she whispered, her figure dissolving as the mirror returned to normal. Eliza left the attic, the locket secure in her pocket. That night, as she prepared for what would come at dawn, the house seemed quieter, almost expectant. Tomorrow, she would end the curse, hoping to bring peace to the spirits trapped within its walls and to herself. Dawn crept quietly over the horizon, casting the first pale light of morning through the windows of the mansion. Eliza hadn't slept much, her mind racing with the enormity of what she would do. Today could mark the end of the haunting, the liberation of spirits bound by a century-old curse. She dressed quickly and pocketed the locket, its weight a constant reminder of the task ahead. In the dim light of early dawn, she made her way down to the kitchen, where she found a small hammer in the drawer, simple, yet capable of ending decades of supernatural bondage. As she stepped out into the garden, the air was crisp, the dew on the grass sparkling under the touch of the first sun rays. She walked to the old oak tree, a landmark that had been mentioned in Margaret's diary as a place of solace. It seemed fitting to choose this spot to break the locket and hopefully the curse. Taking a deep breath, Eliza opened the locket one last time to look at Margaret's painting and the lock of hair. "I hope this is right," she whispered. Clutching the locket tightly in one hand and the hammer in the other, she braced herself. Just as she was about to strike, a gentle voice stopped her. "Wait." Eliza spun around. Behind her stood Henry, his expression solemn. "I thought you might need someone," he said softly. Eliza nodded, grateful for the support. "I'm glad you're here, Henry. I'm just not sure if I can do this." Henry stepped closer, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. It's time for them to find peace. It's time for you to have peace as well." Encouraged by his words, Eliza positioned the locket on a stone near the base of a tree. She raised the hammer, her hand steady this time. With a decisive motion, she brought it down on the locket. The metal bent under the force, the glass covering the painting shattered, and the lock of hair fluttered to the ground. A gust of wind swept through the garden, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree. The air shimmered for a moment, charged with energy, and then settled. The oppressive feel that had clung to the mansion seemed to lift, replaced by a serene calm. "It's done," Eliza said, a mix of relief and disbelief in her voice. She stooped to pick up the remnants of the locket, now just twisted pieces of metal and broken glass. Henry watched her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You did well, Eliza. How do you feel?" "Lighter," she admitted, looking around as if seeing the garden for the first time in full color. "And hopeful. Do you think it worked?" "I believe so," Henry replied, gazing at the tree. "The true test will be the house itself. Shall we?" Together, they walked back to the mansion. As they entered, the usual creaks and groans of the old house were absent. Instead, there was a peaceful silence, a house no longer burdened by its past. Eliza felt a smile spread across her face as they wandered through the rooms. There were no whispers, no chill in the air, just the quiet solitude of an old house at peace. "Looks like you're free to make new memories here," Henry commented as they stood in the foyer. Eliza looked around, her heart full. "Yes, it feels like a home now, not a prison." As they spoke, a sudden idea struck her. "Henry, would you help me document all of this? The history of the house, the curse, everything that happened. I think it's important to remember, so it's never forgotten again." Henry nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Eliza. It would be my pleasure. This is a story worth preserving, a reminder of the past, and a beacon for the future." They agreed to start their project the following week, gathering all the information, the documents she had found, and their own experiences to compile a comprehensive history. As Henry left, Eliza wandered back to the garden, standing under the old oak tree. She looked up through the branches at the clear blue sky and whispered, "Thank you, Margaret. Rest well." For the first time in a long time, the house and its grounds felt truly tranquil, a sanctuary from the world outside. Eliza knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges as she restored the house, but she also knew she wouldn't be doing it alone. The spirits of the past had moved on, but their stories would live on, a testament to her courage and their release. The following days at the mansion felt different for Eliza. The air was lighter, and a sense of calm had settled over the once ominous halls. She moved through the rooms with a newfound purpose, cleaning and organizing, preparing for the task of documenting the mansion's history with Henry. One afternoon, as she was sorting through some old family photographs in the library, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was Henry, carrying a large, leather-bound book under his arm and a satchel filled with notes and recording equipment. "Good afternoon, Eliza." Henry greeted her with his usual warm smile. "I brought everything we need to start compiling our book." "That's wonderful, Henry," Eliza responded, clearing a space on the table. "I've just found some more photographs and letters. They might help us with our project." As they sat down to work, they spread out the documents, organizing them into chronological order. Henry set up a small recorder, explaining, "It's good to talk through our findings. It helps to contextualize everything and might give us more insights as we go along." Eliza nodded, and they began to discuss each item, recording their thoughts and the stories behind the documents. As the afternoon sun faded into evening, they took a break, and Eliza poured them each a cup of tea. Eliza, do you ever think about what you'll do with the house after we finish the books? Henry asked, sipping his tea. I've thought about it a lot, Eliza admitted. I want to keep it to honor the memory of those who lived here before. Maybe open it to the public, have tours, tell the stories of its past. That sounds like a fitting tribute, Henry agreed. This place is a part of history, a lesson on the perils of unchecked emotions and the power of redemption. Their conversation was interrupted by a slight chill that swept through the room, causing Eliza to shiver. Do you feel that? She asked, looking around. Henry paused, feeling the air. It seems like the house still has some secrets left. The temperature in the room dropped, and the faint sound of a woman's voice filled the air, singing a melancholic tune that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Eliza stood up, her heart racing. Margaret, she called out softly. Yes, child, the voice replied, stronger now. I wanted to thank you, one last time, before I leave forever. Tears welled up in Eliza's eyes as she listened to the voice of the woman she had helped to free. You don't need to thank me, Margaret. I'm just glad I could help. There is one last thing I wish for you, Margaret's voice continued, filling the room with warmth despite the cold. Live well in this house, Eliza. Fill it with love and laughter. Let it be what it was meant to before the darkness took over. I will, Margaret. I promise, Eliza responded, feeling a deep connection to the spirit. As the song faded, the warmth returned to the room, and the air felt peaceful once again. Henry, who had witnessed the exchange, placed a comforting hand on Eliza's shoulder. That was beautiful, he said softly. A true final goodbye. Eliza nodded, wiping away a tear. It feels like a real closure. For her, for the house, and for me. They spent a few more hours working, finishing their first chapter. As Henry packed up to leave, he turned to Eliza. Today was extraordinary. I feel honored to be part of this project, and even more so, to be your friend. Thank you, Henry. I feel the same, Eliza replied, smiling. See you tomorrow? Absolutely, Henry confirmed, and with a final nod, he left. Eliza closed the door behind him and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The house was truly hers now, and Margaret's last visit had given her a sense of complete acceptance. She felt ready to move forward, to bring new life to the old walls around her. She wandered back to the library, where the recorder still lay on the table next to their notes. Smiling, she pressed the stop button, capturing the day's events and conversations, a digital testament to the history they were preserving and the new memories they were creating in the once haunted mansion. The morning light streamed through the curtains of the library, casting a warm glow over the room where Eliza was already busy at work. She had spent the early hours reviewing the recordings from the previous day, making notes for the next chapter of their book. As she organized her thoughts, the doorbell rang, pulling her away from the pile of documents sprawled across the desk. Opening the door, she was greeted by Henry, who carried a fresh stack of old maps and estate papers. Good morning, Eliza. I thought these might be useful for our next chapter, he said, offering up the documents with a cheerful grin. Morning, Henry. You're always one step ahead, Eliza replied, leading him into the library. I was just going through yesterday's recordings. There's so much history here, more than I ever realized. As they settled at the library table, Henry laid out the maps, pointing to sections that detailed the estate's original boundaries and structures. These will help us understand the changes over the years, and perhaps even discover why some areas of the house seem more affected than others. Eliza leaned over the maps, intrigued. It's fascinating to see how much has changed. Look here, she pointed at a section of the map. This used to be a garden where now the old well stands. Yes, I noticed that, Henry said, adjusting his glasses. There might be stories attached to these changes. We should look into that. Their work was interrupted by a knock on the front door. Eliza excused herself and returned moments later with a young couple in tow. Henry, this is Sarah and Mike, they're local journalists. They heard about our project and want to feature it in the community news. Henry stood, extending a hand in greeting. That's wonderful. The more people know about the house's history, the better we can preserve its legacy. Sarah, the journalist, was enthusiastic. We were particularly captivated by the stories of hauntings and how Eliza managed to uncover and resolve the mysteries of the house. Mike, her partner, nodded, holding up a camera. If it's okay with you, we'd love to take some photos and maybe get a tour. Eliza smiled, pleased. Of course. Let's start in the main hall. I can tell you the whole story from the beginning. As they walked through the mansion, Eliza narrated the history, her words painting a vivid picture of the past events. Mike snapped photos, while Sarah recorded the details. When they reached the attic, Eliza paused before the mirror, which had once shown her the spirits trapped within the house. This mirror, she began, was where I first saw the spirits that were bound to this place. It's old and was part of the original furnishings. Sarah looked at the mirror, her expression thoughtful. It's incredible to think something like this could hold so much power. Yes, Eliza agreed. But now it reflects just the present, as it should. After the tour, they returned to the library, where Henry had prepared some excerpts from their work to share. The journalists were impressed, promising to write a respectful piece that honored the history and Eliza's efforts to bring peace to the mansion. Once Sarah and Mike had left, Eliza and Henry resumed their work. You know, Henry, Eliza said, looking around at the peaceful library, this place really feels like a home now, and soon it will be open to everyone as a historical site. Henry smiled, his eyes reflecting a deep satisfaction. You've done something remarkable here, Eliza. Not only have you solved the historical mystery, but you've also restored a piece of cultural heritage. Eliza nodded, feeling a deep connection to the house and its history. I think Margaret would be happy. As am I, Henry added. Working on this project has been one of the highlights of my career. As the day wound down, Eliza stood by the window, looking out at the grounds bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. The house stood majestic and serene, its once ominous aura replaced by a welcoming warmth. Tomorrow, we start a new chapter, she said, not just referring to their book, but also to her life in the mansion. Yes, a new dawn indeed, Henry agreed, packing away his notes. And many more chapters to come. As he left, Eliza turned off the lights in the library. The house was quiet, the silence a comfortable, familiar presence. She felt a profound sense of completion and anticipation for the future. Upstairs, the mirror stood silently, no longer a portal to the past, but a simple reflection of the new life Eliza had brought to the mansion. The spirits were at rest, and so was she, ready to welcome the new dawn.